Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and today on Living Mythology, I'm proud to bring you the Pep Talk with John Carl Pepe. But before we start, coming back soon is our segment on pantheons in pop culture. And as we speak, Marvel's Hercules is immersed in God Wars in Miles Morales' Spider-Man. Disney's Hercules is still running, as was Hades until a few issues ago. And the Herculoids are also dynamite. They're not really Hercules, but they were inspired by his name. Null Hunter's Hercules labors on, and they've cut his labors by two in Image Comics for reasons which we don't understand yet. And in the independent arena, Dimitrios Voros's Hercules and Hermes is just completed the second graphic novel. Now, it's not Hermes the god, it's Hermes his dog. So these are the adventures of Hercules and his dog. But they're fascinating nonetheless. And soon the segment will return to our show. But for now, here's John. Greetings, John.
Greetings, Hercules, and I want to wish a belated happy birthday to you. I hope you had a stellar day yesterday.
Thank you. Of course I did. I was with great people.
Very good, very good. All right. Well, Howie, can you hear me good? I think you cut out for a second there. Hercules, you there? Oh, I lost the audio. All right, so hang on one second, folks. As we get into this, I'm just going to swap out my headphones really quick. But here we are, folks. It is the Pep Talk. We are recording on Sunday, June 1st, 2025, and we are having a discussion this evening about one of my favorite topics with a returning guest from the old show. But now we're going to kind of do a bit of a deep dive of a little bit of his career. And so I pop these in here. Let's hope I got some audio going now. So, folks, I'm very happy to have a show tonight talking about one of my favorite characters in pop culture. And we're going to kind of talk about the past, the present, and future. That's right, folks. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Look up at the sky. Who's that guy? What is his name? It's Superman, folks. And tonight, my guest is, well, man, he's a comic book industry legacy, as I am a sort of a legacy in the fake talk show circuit, I guess we'll say. And he cut his teeth writing a wonderful article, recurring article for the late Wizard magazine. Graduated from there to launch Toy Fair magazine, their sister publication, and then went on to become one of the people that spearheaded Superman for DC Comics in the early 2000s, and currently is an amazingly brilliant and gifted graphic designer and website designer. Folks, welcome back to the Pep Talk, but first time on our new format. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, Tom Palmer Jr.
Hello.
Hello.
Very nice intro again. I have to pay you for these things.
By the word, Tom. By
Yes.
the word. Yes.
I know how that works.
So welcome back.
Yeah.
How's the dog?
Wonderful. Hopefully you don't hear him.
That's all right. That, you know what? Those like weird interruptions kind of make for good podcasts sometimes.
We'll just say that he's protecting the house. That's what we like.
Good.
Start barking at random things in the middle of the night.
So yeah, Tom, we're gonna kind of talk a little bit about your beginning, you know, with Wizard and kind of how you went from Wizard to Toy Fair, but then we really want to focus on the Superman stuff. So really briefly, you know, because you started Wizard as a young lad, so
Still in high school.
Still in high school. Not now. You're still not in high school.
I'm still out of high school now.
You are currently out of high school. Okay, very good.
I have graduated.
So yeah, you're in high school, as the story goes. You used to house sit for the Simonsons, Walter and Louise.
Mostly like helping organize their books. They would get a lot of comics. they would buy a lot of books for like reference. They had a lot of papers from because Louise Simonson was working on the Superman books at the time,
Right.
and they were very coordinated because all the titles were interconnected. You know, every week was a different part of the story. So this was before email, before faxing. The faxing was still around, was around, but they weren't using as much. But they would FedEx copies of everything that was going on with the other books to all the other writers and artists. So they would be able to be in sync. So, you know, she had stacks of papers from all those books that were going on as she was writing. So that stuff needed to be organized, and just every square inch of their house was books, like in the bathroom, in the kitchen, like every spare bedroom was just bookshelves all over the place. Uh, you know, Walt had a huge comic collection and, you know, was keeping up with all the books that were coming out from all the various publishers, and all that stuff needed to be put away and organized. And, you know, I was a young kid who had that mind for putting stuff together like that. And so I would help them out every month or two. And happened to be up there one time when Gareb Shamus, the publisher of Wizard, just starting up the magazine, and they were interviewing the Simonsons, and you know, just got to talking, and he said, "Oh, you don't have any ideas for anything? You can, you know, pitch us something." And you know, being a high school kid, I was just like, "Oh, let me just write something about the books that I'm reading," and you know, kind of went from there.
Which was unique for the magazine at the time because you know, like a lot of us, you grew up on a steady diet of the Marvel, DC, right?
Right.
The big two. But very early on, you gravitated towards the more small press indie comic stuff.
Yeah.
And so that was your comic diet. That was primarily your comic diet at that point, and the stuff you wanted to write about, which
Yeah.
was an anathema to that magazine, and yet was the longest running consecutive article in that magazine.
Yeah, I was not by any of my talent at that point, because I was still a high school kid. You know, it wasn't like it was like very well written. It was just, you know, I basically did my version of a 5 paragraph essay for my first article there. It was just kind of like, it's very embarrassing to read it now, but my thinking at that time was, you know, looking at the magazine, I was like, oh well, you know, the whole um, readers at that point weren't really reading comics. They were just looking at them and they're following the artists. So my thinking was initial when I first started was, let me just do something about writers. So the first one was about Sandman and Neil Gaiman, which now probably not doesn't look so good, but back then it was a different story, you know, at the time.
All right, we're going to digress for a second
Yeah.
here. You know, I am a firm believer of you should separate the art from the artist, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I mean, if you were reading Neil Gaiman, if you were well versed in Neil Gaiman's work, you knew the guy was, I'm just gonna say, a bit of a freak. Okay, you know, when
Mm.
it comes to certain things. So when this stuff sort of comes out, I mean, it's all kind of there. Like you look at Calliope, right? So so I think especially his work, you know, in what he did in crossing over comics with literature, introducing people to this art form and to history and all the, and even just his prose. Still think American Gods is one of the greatest novels of the 21st century. Though I think it was slightly, no, it was 2001. So, you know, when all of this is said and done and all this comes out in the wash, you know, that is something where I really hope that that his work can still be appreciated and dissected and studied. You know,
Yeah,
I,
yeah. I mean, yeah, yes, there's also, I think he deserves credit for, that was one of the early series that was really pushed as, let's collect the whole thing as graphic novels, and let's design these storylines as graphic novels, not as, you know, a monthly, you know, what's going on with this character this month. It was more of, you know, here's a 6 part story and it's gonna have a beginning, middle, and end, and then the following month it's gonna be another 8 part story and another, you know, and then once those were done, they went back and collected those as graphic novels, and the market wasn't there for you. The bookstore market wasn't there at that point, but it helped make that happen.
at that point, the only thing really you could find in bookstores was like Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe a
Mouse.
Man of Steel, a mouse, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you deserve credit for giving him that bump, because you did open up a lot of people that would not pay attention to Sandman by writing that first article, so I
Yeah.
think that's good on you for that as well. I think he owes you a thank you.
Yeah. Maybe that is, his star is lowered so much that I'll be like, hey, wait a minute.
So yeah, touchy subject. It's a shame. All of that is a shame. And I know I know you've also encountered that, or in the periphery of certain things that, that again, that's not what we're here to talk about, right?
No, no.
So you went from Wizard, you wrote 75 columns
Uh, it
or
was,
articles.
it was issue 6 when it started, and it was around issue 70 or 80 something
Yeah.
when it was done. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was
They-
through the end of high school, through college, and then after I got out of college. So it was, every month had the monthly grind of having the deadline every month, and yeah, trying to fit
were
it in,
you
tests and partying and you know.
were you able to finagle any high school credit out of that?
No,
Ah,
no, no. Yeah, the
go back.
college, like in college, they were just kind of like, "What? You do
What?
what?"
You did
Yeah.
what? So,
But it was like I took like a magazine writing course, and they're like, "Yeah, whatever. It's comic books, whatever." Like,
so the decision to end the column, was it mutual? Was it just sort of like
mm,
onwards and
yeah,
upwards?
they always like to redesign the magazine every year or two. So they were having one of their big redesigns, and they're like, "Hey, you're on staff now. You're working at the toy magazine now, and
Yeah.
where there's a number of things going on where they were trying to cut down on staff employees getting freelance writing
Hmm.
payment. They would rather their people that were on salary for writing got paid to write those things instead of paying outside people that
Hmm.
were on
Hmm.
staff, which is one thing.
Which as a currently freelance, right?
Yeah,
It's actually kind of a good thing, because especially when you're that young, you don't have to worry about your taxes. You do get, did you get that 401k? Did they have that going for you at the time as a staff?
yeah, but
Yeah.
it wasn't great,
No, yeah. It's
yeah,
probably
they
worse
weren't,
now, but hey,
yeah,
that it is what it
yeah,
is. But I'm
yeah,
just saying, like, as a young person, it's kind of cool you had that freelance experience to start, but
right.
growing up to get that kind of, so then then knew also how to negotiate the freelance later on. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah. But it was more of a cost-cutting method measure on their side because they
Of
were,
course.
they didn't want to pay people who they were giving a salary to write for the other magazines. So I was working for the toy
Mhm.
magazine. Why are they paying me to write for Wizard magazine when they could have someone on staff do a small press column?
Okay.
So
Okay.
basically, what they did is like they said, "Oh, we're going to get rid of your column, but we're still going to have little mini articles of, little small press books that make the cut." Which I think they did for like a month or two, and then they stopped.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then finally, like a year or two later, they came back and they brought around another small press column with someone else on staff. But it was very uh, advertising driven.
Hmm.
So a lot of the stuff in the magazine is like a dirty secret of like, if you bought advertising, all of a sudden there'd be an article about you, about your comic. you know Whereas the column, better or worse, had my name on it. It was called Palmer's Picks, so I
Hmm.
was kind of in control of who I would cover, and they could say to me, "Oh, do you want to talk about this comic?" And I would be like, "No, I don't, because I don't think it's any good." So it was up to me. It was my decision of what was going to be covered in the column, and I think they wanted a little more editorial control of.
Okay.
But this is my speculation. The way it was presented to me was, you're working on the toy magazine. You should focus on that. We're going to still have small press things. We'll throw you one of those articles every year, every now and then,
Mm.
which they did. I got like one or two other things after that, but then, you know,
Yeah.
way, yeah.
And the most indie it probably got would be like Kevin Smith doing comic books type articles, right?
Right.
Now, so I didn't realize, or I guess I forgot that the Palmer's Picks was still going when Toy Fair started,
Mhm. Yeah.
and
Yeah, the reason I got the Toy Fair gig was because my editor for the column, my contact at Wizard was Scott Beatty, who they had tapped. He was also editing the toy column, and he had a big interest in the action figure stuff and the old Migos and the old toys that he loved when he was a kid, and they tapped him to head up the spin-off toy magazine that they were doing. And
uh,
we had a good relationship, and he said, "Hey, you just graduated from college. I hear you're looking for a job. Would you consider, coming on staff and being my assistant?" So, you know, it just kind of worked out that way. And
yeah.
I guess the interview went well.
And that was a good, good time. That was really a toy boom at that time. You
Mhm.
had the Star Wars figures had come
Yeah.
back, but then with the prequels, there was that like even heightened like just
Mhm.
desire for that. You had Toy Biz upping their game, doing the Spider-Man classics, Marvel Legends
Mhm.
stuff. All that stuff was kind of hitting right when Toy Fair. So it was kind of neat at that time to be following
Yeah.
it. Just since it's
I think it was who did the Total Justice? That was the
that was
DC?
still Kenner. Yeah, it was the
Oh, Kenner
DC
still had that. Yeah.
Kenner. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Getting better. Still they looked a little flayed, but
Yeah.
a cool Hawkman figure. So I was like,
Mhm.
that's great. I love Hawkman.
Yeah.
So yeah, so they so you were doing that, and again, you grew up and playing with toys. You
Yeah.
are still somewhat of a toy collector, and
Yeah.
you kind of keep an eye, I think, on what goes on out there.
I've got some on
Uh,
my desk here. You can't see them, but they're looking at me.
and so that was late 90s. And at what point were you lured away or decided to leave? And again, that Wizard Toy Fair staff, great bunch of guys. I got to hang out,
Mhm.
with you and them in New City, and so that was a really fun, I would almost frat house environment to a
Yeah, yeah,
degree.
definitely had that feel to it.
Some good
Nerdy frat
times.
house. Yeah.
Yeah, some good times. But again, I can also see the desire to kind of move on from that, because that
Mhm.
does, you're out of college by that point,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so
yeah.
so where did that decision transition happen?
Yeah, it was again, they were, the comic industry was going through a lot of ups and downs at that point in time. I think Marvel was in a lot of trouble. There was a lot of, I think the distributor stuff was going on. So things
The
weren't
more
so great.
the more
And
things change, Tom, the more
yeah,
things
I know. It's
change,
like,
right?
there's a lot of belt tightening going on at Wizard, and things were kind of changing. There was like writing on the wall, and it was a different environment. I wasn't, having as much fun anymore. And I made some contacts, in the industry, and kind of poked around a little bit. And Patty Jarrah's over at DC. She was kind of in the uh, PR department, and she was the contact for a lot of the comic stuff. So I knew her from just going to events and going to different things, through the toy stuff, but then also it was still in the comic world. And I got in touch with her, and she said, they were hiring up at DC, and went on a little interview, and it seemed to go okay, and they offered me a job. So,
And so it was so because you were an assistant editor at Toy Fair,
mhm.
and so you
And I
interviewed
moved up to be editor.
to be full editor,
Yeah.
and then you interviewed for what was the actual position you were interviewing for, or was it just we're going to interview you and we're going to see where we want to place you?
Yeah. So I interviewed um, at DC. There was a job opening up at Vertigo, assistant editor job up at Vertigo, and that didn't. They were looking for someone else. It
Okay.
wasn't a fit. I wasn't what they were looking for, which is a little
Yeah,
disappointing to me because I was kind of like, I was like, oh, it was crazy, it's cool, it's Vertigo, but
yeah. You knew too much about indie comics and how cool Vertigo
Yeah,
was.
yeah. Um, so then they were like, oh, there's an opening down in the regular DC world, for same, assistant editor position. And yeah, so I interviewed for that and that worked out.
And that's when you got placed on the Superman books after that
Yeah,
interview. Did you
yeah.
know at the time that you were interviewing for Superman, or was it just something in the
No, it was
affiliate?
that it was for that office. Yeah, so it was
Okay.
super. Yeah, I think the Titans was in there,
Right on.
and I think
I
Wonder Woman was just switching over to that. They were just picking up Wonder Woman in that office.
okay, gotcha. And and so it's I get a sense though a little bit it's sort of like you tried out for the school play, you wanted the lead,
All right.
and you're a tree.
Yeah, pretty
A
good. Yeah.
little bit. So, but now, I mean, again, growing up of our era,
Mhm.
there had to have been a love of Superman to a degree.
Oh, but that the Donner movie was my entry point. I loved that movie when I was a kid. That was
Mm.
like, that movie was amazing.
Yeah,
That was my world when that came out. I was like, I just I I breathed it, lived it, breathed it. I analyzed it. It was like I love that movie. It was great. It was like
nice.
perfect thing for that time. It was like to have a superhero movie. At that age, at that time, done with care, and wasn't just something. It had its silly moments, but it wasn't done completely as camp. And you know,
It is a near perfect movie. It is
yeah.
absolutely. It is probably. I mean, probably my desert island movie. I think. I
Mhm.
think that's the
Mhm.
one. Yeah, that is
Yeah.
such a good movie.
I haven't seen it in a long time, but I know like as soon as you put it on, and it's like it's mesmerizing.
Yeah,
It's
almost yearly for me, to be
yeah.
honest. Like I just, yeah. Um, but you never, but Superman really wasn't in your comic diet at the
I
as
was I was
as a
I was a
kid.
Marvel kid,
You're a Marvel kid, yeah.
and Superman was corny. Those comics were corny, and it was
And what about in '86 when you now again you probably already knew who Alan Moore was at that point, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
So were you when they did the two farewell to corny Superman,
yeah.
was that something you at that age were
No, I came
no?
back to that later. Yeah, yeah.
And so then what about somebody who, who was almost bottle fed John Byrne's X-Men,
Mhm.
as the artist and co-plotter on X-Men. Yes, I'm giving him that co-plotter credit.
Yeah, yeah.
As the as one of those the creative team on that, when he was given the assignment to make Superman, you know, less corny, with the classic Man of Steel miniseries with that
Yeah.
great, one of those early variant covers, right?
Right,
With
right,
doing, you
yeah.
had that cover where he's doing that whole thing. So, is that something that you checked out at the time, or
I checked out. Yeah, it wasn't like, it wasn't I didn't fall in love with it.
okay?
Um, I think I was at that age where I was kind of, you know, getting out of the superhero stuff, and kind of, I was kind of been there, done that with it.
Hmm.
It's like I've seen this stuff before. I don't know if it really matters if it's a different company and a different character, you know, right? I moved on just, in my tastes and stuff, it wasn't.
Didn't really scratch that itch for you, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for someone like me who, again was, steady diet of spinner rack stuff at the drugstore,
Mhm.
comics, and then eventually discovering Schiller's books, right, the Garce
Oh yeah,
Plaza, right.
yeah.
But yeah, that kind of hit me right at that time because that was right within my diet. I already had read a bunch of the Byrne X-Men stuff, so I was really primed for that. And to kind of get in on the ground floor, I picked up the Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, the Alan Moore issues, off the rack at that point. Like I was really looking for this stuff. And
Yeah.
so that really, I think, hit me at the right time. One of the things I loved was it did for my sensibility, my 11-year-old sensibilities, it did for me make Superman cooler.
Mm.
He was he was built, they stripped away all the stuff from Krypton, so at that point,
Yeah.
he was the sole thing. And the burn run about almost 2 years. And of course, heads got butted and he walked, but the blueprint he left behind, and the people that picked up on that ball, I was in. I loved it, and then when they did the triangle numbers, for people who
Oh
don't
yeah,
know,
right.
at that time, post burn, before your tenure, or right around your tenure, they would do these triangle numbers. It started with 3 books. Superman, they relaunched Superman with #1. They gave classic Superman numbering to Adventures of Superman,
Mhm.
and then Action Comics maintained its numbering, and that was the team up book. And you had
Right.
stories that were sort of running tangential, right? Then they decided, well, we're going to kind of make this a cohesive thing. People can do their arcs in their own books, but you still have to kind of space it and spread it, and then to help the reader, they would put these little triangle numbers for the year. They would have the year and what week of the year it was at that book. And then eventually they added a 4th title. So almost every week of the year, you had a Superman book. Then they were like, that's not enough. There's a 5th
We need the
week, that
quarterly.
pesky 5th week. So they did the quarterly Superman Man. So Superman Man of Steel was the 4th monthly, which was the book Louise was working on.
Mhm.
And then they did the Superman Man of Tomorrow as a quarterly. And so, so that was this sort of interconnectivity, clearly peaked with the story that very few people know about, the death of Superman and the return of Superman.
They killed Superman.
Yeah, they did, but it's okay. He got better because it's comics. And so all of this sort of tightly coordinated, they would have these famous super summits. Mike Carlin was the group
Mhm.
editor at the time, spearheading all this. And then so you started there in 99, 2000?
It was 2000.
2000, right?
Yeah.
Um after but like after January 2000, right? It was like right
Um,
after, wasn't it?
uh, why are you
So
questioning?
because that's the thing, is there was like a lot of that interconnectivity was going on. They
Yeah,
built up that big Superman Y2K, which you had
yeah,
nothing to do with. That was before you
yeah,
started.
yeah, yeah.
And it was shortly after that they kind of just dumped everybody that had been
Hmm.
on the books, dropped the triangle numbering. Uh right, because I think by the time you start, no, you still had the triangles
You
when you
still have the
started.
triangles, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But that lasted.
It lasted for a little bit. Then we kind of everyone, the writers kind of wanted to do their own thing.
Right.
They wanted to um, not have to coordinate with everyone else. They felt it was kind of holding them back,
Yeah.
and it kind of, I think some of the writers still wanted to connect together, but then other guys kind of, I think, didn't like playing with everyone else. They wanted
Right.
to ball,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is fair,
Yeah.
but
I remember, so that was the thing, because like there was this fun thing that you guys started to do where story trumped continuity, right?
mhm.
So that you wanted the creators to create and to tell their stories, but you didn't want them to be locked in so much to what other people were doing. But if somebody broke an arm in one book, maybe you'd have them in a sling in one of the other books,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, and then eventually, every now and then, the titles would come together for these big epic stories like
yeah,
Emperor
right,
Joker, which is, I think, one of the greatest stories of that era,
yeah, yeah.
Um, so you come on as an associate editor,
Assistant,
or you started as an assistant
assistant,
editor,
yeah.
and
The difference was that you were an assistant, and you couldn't edit your own books. And then once you became an associate, you still did the assistant job, but you had 1 or 2 books that you were the sole editor on.
right.
Yeah.
And so when you come in, first and foremost, you're like, I didn't read any of this stuff that happened before I started. So catch me up to speed, right? But
And
but
that was actually, but I had concerns about that when I interviewed, and they were actually saying like that was actually a benefit to me,
exactly.
for them, because they said, oh, you're not steeped in the DC stuff. You grew up with Marvel. they wanted that feel, they didn't want the DC, the stodginess that was kind of the old DC kind of had that kind of feel to, or
Mhm.
people had that preconceived notion about a lot of DC things, that it was kind of stuck in the past and old, and the house style. DC always had a house style, um, and they wanted more of the Marvel approach of, like, the artists were could go off model. You had an Ed McGuinness who was not anywhere near like the Kurt Swan or Garcia Lopez classic Superman look. He brought like a modern style to it. You had Duncan Rouleau,
Mhm.
who was completely, way, just a crazy artist, a brilliant, brilliant artist, but not what you would associate with Superman. You're not a traditional Superman artist. Um, I'm
Right.
trying to think of the other names, but they wanted like a visual flair to the books and not make them look so on model and on brand.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Which again is even when Byrne left, there was, it kind of morphed into the Dan Jurgens style, the Kerry Gamble, Dan
Hmm.
Jurgens,
Hmm.
Bogdanov with Louise really kind of again went off on his, but he was still doing sort of a retro 40s thing
Yeah, yeah,
too. Yeah.
it was a retro style. It was more expressive than some of the other guys, but it was still that traditional style to it.
And Jackson Butch Guice,
Hmm.
RIP, tragically, we
Yes.
lost him recently. He was kind of doing a bit of a Kirby-esque thing on action at that time too,
Yeah.
and and so it's interesting you say that they wanted that sort of out of the box thinking for the big guy, right? And that kind of makes me think, okay, that's probably why they didn't want to put you in Vertigo. They wanted sort of that sensibility also to carry over to a degree because
Nah, yeah, I think it's more just that Vertigo was looking for something else.
I,
I didn't fit what they were looking for, and the person they hired didn't work out. So I felt,
oh, so there you go.
yeah, I was like an indicator, like, oh, okay, see, they should have hired me.
Well, you know what? They're bringing it back, so you can
Yeah,
always
yeah, yeah,
re-interview for Vertigo.
yeah. I mean, I had some good friends that worked in the Vertigo office. They had some good people working up there. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And yeah, you mentioned some artists. One of the other artists who I know was a favorite of yours before he was working on Superman, because you were always talking up the book Major Bummer, uh,
Yeah.
illustrated by Doug Mahnke, and I
Yeah.
think you like his art a lot too. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
had he already been on the book when you came
Yeah.
aboard, or
Yeah. He
yeah.
was there already. Yeah.
Um, but I know he was very fun and again was so yeah, I kind of want to get into a little bit of some of the stuff you did, because some of the stuff you did while you were there is still in play today. We've talked about before the President Lex Luthor
Mhm.
as a thing in
Yeah.
comics started with you guys.
They
Um,
were putting that together when I was just starting. So
okay, so it
yeah.
was a little later in 2000, right? Right.
Yeah. So it was
Yeah.
closer. I mean, we were timing it to come for the election. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So it
that's
was
right.
being worked on, but I had a schedule. So yeah. So it came out around. Yeah.
So then I think, yeah, so then it was by like January, February, I think, of 2001. That's when you had your Jeff Loeb, Ed McGuinness, and then doing Superman. And it was
They were already up and running
they
because
had already okay.
yeah, they were part of the Y2K storyline. They were.
That's right. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
my memory gets a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
Steady diet of too many comics. Um, and because I remember that's sort of the one of the early big storylines that I feel that you worked on, and correct me again if I'm wrong,
Mhm.
was that Superman is fighting Mongol and he forgets to take the wedding ring off.
No,
That was
that was before
that
me. I came in. They were one of the first books I remember I was helping out on. They didn't. I don't think my name was on it. Was the end of Emperor Joker.
okay. Oh, so you're
Yeah.
at the
So
end of Emperor Joker.
yeah, yeah. So that was um, because we had to make a change on the book, um, because the writer, you know, when you have the word flick in all uppercase,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
the L and the I come together and make the letter U.
Yep.
which is not good when you have an F before it and a CK. So there was a big sound effect that said flick, and the word balloon before it was the Joker, the big, he was Emperor Joker, so he was a huge Emperor Joker in the sky. And he said, "Oh, I'm gonna write an ode to Mother," and you see his little finger with the flick sound effect right next to the word Mother. So we had to make a big change to that part of the page to get rid of the flick sound effect. That was remember it was one of the things that stuck in my memory of when I
Of what
first
do you
started working there.
and that's a lot of also I think what you have to do as the assistant slash associate editor position is that damage control, that late print run or artists are running behind deadline. I got to get
Yeah,
a bunch of inkers to kind of work on this, which
yeah.
brings me to so again, Emperor Joker written by it was Jeff Loeb and
Joe
Joe
Kelly,
Kelly,
Joe
Casey, right?
Joe Casey. I
Yeah.
don't think was he there yet? And Mark Schultz.
Mark
Oh, you know,
Schultz, right?
it wasn't Joe Casey yet. I think it was still JM DeMatteis.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
He was on Action
So, and I know that you and Joe,
or
worked
Adventures. Sorry, Action. Joe Kelly was on Action.
right.
DeMatteis was on Adventures, and Loeb was on Superman, and Mark Schultz is on Man of Steel.
Got it. Right. And and I think you and Joe Kelly worked on several things together. I know I got the opportunity to meet him at your
Right.
bachelor party and infamously sprayed him with Axe body spray. And Joe, again, I still apologize to you for that. If you wanna come on the show and give me guff, great. But I would love to talk about some Immortal Sergeant as well, because that was one of my favorite series in the last couple of years. Was this great indie series Image, but yeah,
Yeah.
but great squiggle animation style art and just crazy characters. But yeah, Joe, I love you. I love your writing. And I want to talk about the very famous Action Comics number 775, written
Hmm.
by Joe Kelly,
Yeah.
with art by Doug
Doug.
Monk and Lee Bermejo doing
Mhm.
line art
Yeah.
in his early carear.
Yeah. It was early stuff. It
Yeah,
was pretty cool.
very Tony Harris-esque. I don't know if
Yeah.
they came out of the same studio or not, but I always felt his line art in that issue came across very, very much in that style, which I really resonated with. And someone on mentioned basically half the inkers working at DC Comics at the time.
Yeah, the reason Lee had a couple of pages in there is because of the deadline. The deadline was looming, and it was an oversized issue because it was
Mhm.
775, and
And Doug is a very detailed artist and puts
Joe was a very detailed writer too. So
a lot of detail, a lot
everyone
of
was running behind. So
interesting.
yeah.
And
I think the idea was to make that issue a special one and make it the story special, and there was a lot of uh, you know it took a lot of time to get that going and make sure it was done right. So I think
well,
that's why we had a lot of people involved to get it through the door.
it absolutely paid off, because that is considered the single issue definitive Superman story that still is resonating to today.
Mhm.
One of the really cool things about it is that Joe Kelly also had the opportunity to write the animated adaptation of that,
Mm.
Superman versus the Elite, which again, it's a great script. I think it's one of the best animated Superman movies that they've done. Not crazy about the animation style for that particular one, but that is a story that again will also has been sort of put out there as informing the new Superman movie coming out. I don't know if you
Mhm.
knew, but there's actually going to be a new Superman movie coming out.
Mm.
Yeah.
See it?
And yeah, that's kind of why we're doing this, right? um and so one of the cool things though about Action 775 is uh one of the current trends in comics right now are facsimile reprints.
Mm.
And they've been doing the treasury size from the 70s as facsimile reprints. And facsimile, for people who don't know, is if you've ever heard the term fax machine, fax is short for facsimile. It is a copy of an original, and facsimile reprints are all the the ads as they originally appeared, all it's the book as it originally appeared when it was originally published, just using today's paper with today's cover prices, and slapping a foil cover or a blank cover on there too as well. So so that is actually getting the Action 775 is getting the facsimile reprint treatment this coming Wednesday.
No, I did not.
Yeah, June 4th, right? Yeah. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Oh, so I guess
I do not get any royalties off of
you don't
that.
get a piece of that either, huh?
As editors, when you're an editorial team, you do not get royalties. I'm assuming that everyone else, all the creative talent, get them, which is well deserved. But
Sure, sure.
we
Yeah, it's
did
also
nothing.
as the person who got Superman Red Sun published as an
Mhm.
Elseworlds, you were editor on that.
Yeah.
And again, toys, animated adaptation,
Yeah.
you get Bupkis.
Bupkis.
Ah.
Absolutely. I don't even get my own. I don't even get a comp copy. Nothing. Yeah, nothing.
And yeah, and that also that opened up the door for a lot of people's preferred darker take on Superman, right? I think
Yeah.
without that, there'd be no Injustice. There'd be no people hating on the bright colors of the new Superman movie that's coming out.
Right.
But yeah, and again, it was a really cool piece of work, really great concept.
Yeah.
And that was, what's the story behind that? Because there's an interesting story behind that.
Yeah, it had been sitting around unpublished, unfinished in some drawers in the offices.
What they call an inventory drawer, right?
Not really inventory, is more just like this project is kind of stalled.
Okay.
It was always designed as a prestige series. Just there was, some difficulties of getting people to finish their work. So, um, you know, the original editor would kind of, I guess, lost steam on it. So it was passed off, and I kind of ran with it. It was kind of like when it was started. The writer Mark Miller, I think he was doing the animated Superman book at DC.
Mhm.
It was early in his career, so he wasn't a big name writer at that point. He just had a good idea that they approved as a prestige series. And then as time went on, he became a bigger name, and he had moved over to Marvel at that point. And I think it was mostly just the luck of the just having it done to that and on the stands when it came out, because he'd become more of a persona, and he was out there promoting things, and which is what he does now, of just is brilliant at it, just promoting his own works and getting people excited about them. And I think the book kind of benefited from that opportunity, and that he was a bigger name and people paid attention to it more. And you know, it was just, I think it was a good time for it to come out when it did.
Mm. And
I don't know if it would have had the same reaction if it came out earlier when it was supposed to,
right,
because he was still up and coming at that point, and he had the benefit. I gave him the benefit of he was able to go back and kind of massage the dialogue, from and update it a little bit from when he had originally written it, just to bring it up to his talents at that point in his career.
And again, that is another high watermark. I mean, that is a watershed moment in the publication history that people still seek out to this day. It is definitely
Yeah.
really revered. So that's awesome. Again,
Yeah, and, at that point, the Elseworlds thing um, people thought it kind of ran out of steam. That whole
Mhm.
concept, they kind of flooded the market with too many Elseworlds that were just kind of like, you know, not as not as deserving of the prestige format as some of the
Mhm.
other ones. Some of the better ideas. So uh, again, I think if it had come out earlier when there were more Elseworlds that were better, it probably would have gotten lost in them. But when it did come out, there were not as many to compare it to that weren't as good. So it kind
Mhm.
of stood out more.
Yeah, yeah, because it was always what if Batman was Green Lantern, and
Yeah,
or
yeah.
what if, the famous cheat that for those that I always think of is the speeding bullets. What if Superman became Batman, was
Mhm.
found by the Waynes, and I was like, that's great, the whole thing's great, except for when they have Lex Luthor turn into the Joker, and I'm like, that's too
Yeah.
close. Another kind of watershed moment that you guys had was you made a big costume change, or a slightly minor costume change, in reference to a previous known story. I'm talking about the post Our Worlds at War crossover, when the logo became this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this. All right.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was kind of a neat thing to do. That lasted for a little while, right? That
Mhm.
was and what do you remember was the thought behind that?
Yeah, it was more. It was another weird timing thing, but our thought was like it was like a you know for the fallen of the war for that storyline,
Mm-hmm.
just to honor those people. Um, but the timing of it, the way when it came out was right after 9/11. So it kind of had that dual meaning to it, which we did not intend, but
No, no, you
yeah,
do.
obviously, but. And then the other weird thing that we did not plan at all was the LexCorp Towers. The issue of, I think it was Adventures of Superman, that came out that week of 9/11,
Mhm.
had the fallout from the Our Worlds at War storyline. Was one of the towers had gotten hit with, forget what, but it was smoking. It was like smoke. It was damaged. There was smoke coming out of it, and
Mhm.
I was weird one of the things that came to my head as we were like in the office on 9/11. I was like, oh my god, this book is coming out tomorrow. Like, do we have to I think one of the things that was going on at DC at that point was where books would get pulped
Mhm.
before they came
Yep.
out. So if there was like an error in the advertising or something, or like something slipped through the cracks, they would pulp the entire run of a comic before it could hit the
Mhm.
stores.
Yep.
I was like, oh my God, are we gonna have to pulp this issue of Superman because of this building on fire that looks strangely like the Twin Towers? But luckily they didn't. They didn't do that. But yeah.
uh yeah, and it's kind of interesting too, because the other time that always sticks out in my mind, that sort of timing, was in the 95, when John Byrne was doing Wonder Woman, and then Princess Diana dies uh
Oh wow.
in
Okay.
real life,
Yeah.
but he had also killed Wonder Woman
Yeah.
in the comic.
Oh
It's
wow.
okay, folks, she got better. It is comics. But the issue that came out the Wednesday after real life Princess Diana was a mock, the cover was a mock Daily Planet
Hmm.
front page, Princess Diana dead.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and Wonder Woman, of course. But so those weird coincidences are fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Another thing that you guys did was you started to roll back the concept that we talked about earlier of Superman being the only survivor of Krypton.
Hmm.
And you did that in a story, the return of Krypton, which right, that was something you worked on as well, right? That's
Hmm.
started to bring back the 1950s aesthetic,
Yeah.
which again, a great example of like, story over continuity. I know it bent a lot of people's minds, I think myself included, for a little bit,
Right.
especially because over in Starman, James Robinson was having Jack Knight meet the Byrne
Hmm.
Jor-El,
Yeah.
and that look was consistent.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, there was sort of a funny out to that. You kind of were able to make both exist. And then right around that time, Mark Waid does his Birthright miniseries, which I actually
Yeah. I think
have
the
the
timing might be a little off,
what?
maybe. I think the timing might be a little off of when that all last happened, but
Interesting. Okay, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, it was all in the early 2000s. Again, it's all a blur now, believe it
yeah,
or not. 25
yeah,
years later, I have no idea
right.
what's going on. But but then you gave me this. I still have this. This
Yeah,
is
yeah.
yeah. And so because now Mark Waid had kind of and I think a couple other writers had a pitch in 2000s to sort of revamp Superman.
Hmm.
And then but this became the go-to origin because yeah, I think this came out first because I think the Return of Krypton used some of the designy elements or folded this into that to,
Yeah, Birthright was they're trying to straddle the line, so they kind of we're trying to pick and choose, design elements and ideas from it's kind of like taking cherry picking like the best things from all the different versions. So you had a little bit of the Burn stuff in there, you had a little bit of the classic stuff, just design wise and story wise. It's kind of trying to um, you know, bring in some of the things that Byrne had kind of taken away
Mhm.
from the Superman story and kind of bring them back and kind of marry those two together, but still kind of keep it modern and fresh. Um, and that was, I think, there was a lot of political things going on, just office wise, where the reason like Wade and the other writers weren't allowed to get the Superman books, but things were changing, and that's why he was able to then do Birthright, and then some of those other writers were able to come in and do things with Superman at that point too. And, yeah.
And a neat thing about this is that there was something I think that maybe we'll have to talk about some other time, maybe after the movie comes out, because I kind of
Mhm.
want to do a little bit of a breakdown on the movie as well, and my anxieties going into this. Because here's the cycle: a trailer comes out, I get excited.
Yeah.
Then I start hearing rumblings, right? Because of course you can't avoid all of those
Yeah.
rumblings, and I get nervous. And a new trailer comes out, I'm excited, and then more rumblings and lather, rinse, repeat like 3 times now. So,
Yeah.
but apparently, what I've heard is that the James Gunn has cited that this is informing elements of the new movie,
Okay.
and I
But they're
think
not doing the origin in the movie,
they're
right?
not doing the
Yeah.
origin, but I think that what it seems like the element is going to be is that Lex Luthor learns about Krypton and
By
kind
reading a
of
copy of Birthright.
if I reading a copy of Birthright. Yeah, it's very weird what
Very,
apparently what
very
he's doing. But yeah.
meta.
And then Sean Gunn just comes in as Sean Gunn and says, "Yeah, look, you should no, but the plot that to turn people against Superman by saying no, he's an advance invasion. He's scouting
Mhm.
us for an
Okay.
invasion from Kryptonians, and then Luther
Yeah.
fakes a big Kryptonian invasion, and then that's
Okay.
where Superman kind of so yeah, that's the
Oh,
elements
so
that I
that's that
think.
that creature that shows up or something, maybe
Yeah, I
that's
don't
like
know what that is.
fighting.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see. Again, 2 hour, 2 minute movie. We've only seen about 3 to 5
Yeah.
minutes of it.
Yeah.
So who knows what's going to
You could be
happen with
seeing
this
stuff
thing.
from the beginning of the movie that doesn't matter to the rest of it. You could, yeah.
Yeah. But yet and other elements from this have been taken. Poor Mark Waid, he must have been really happy when they said the S means hope in Man of Steel, but then famously stood up and shouted no in the theater when Superman snaps Zod's neck at the end. So
Yeah.
that poor guy with that roller coaster, at least he
Yeah.
gets a street named after him in the new movie, it looks like. But one of the things that this does is reestablish the old notion that Superman and Lex knew each other in Smallville, and
Mhm.
that was an influence from the Smallville show that
Right.
creeped in back into the comics. And I always love that sort of
Yeah, that's what I was saying, that the Birthright was trying to like pick the best things from all the different versions of Superman and kind of, give you like I don't want to say ultimate, but it was like the ultimate Superman, because that was Marvel's Ultimate line, and this was like the ultimate Superman story,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
So we have just about 5 minutes left. Now again, speaking of Smallville, you did also edit the Smallville tie-in comic at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, and actually one of
Uh
the first things I did on staff was help put together the pitch Bible for when we were talking to the people making the TV show. So I had to go research and do little write-ups on different characters for them to them to get the creators involved.
Right. Right. And that was that was also a big thing in comics at the time too. A lot of TV shows did have licensed comics. Dark Horse had, well, first Topps Comics, remember them, but
Hmm.
then Dark Horse, X-Files and Buffy. And so that adapting comics within a framework of a TV show was very popular at that time, kind of continues still to this day. Um, so were were you ever able to pitch something that was able to come to fruition while you were there?
What do you mean, pitch something?
Like pitch a title, a project, or were you just given assignments?
Uh, Stuff was kind of developed like um, I had a couple books. I think we pitched the Teen Titans Go
Right.
because they didn't want to do a tie-in comic from that, so we kind of had to twist their arm and
Hmm.
force them to do it, and that really worked out.
And that's
Surprising.
now back as a comic.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
doing
yeah,
new ones of that.
yeah.
Um, Hang on one second. I get a little hot really quick before we get out of here, but I just want to, because the classics never do go out of style, right? So we always got to revert back to what we know. So if you were to pitch a Superman story, Tom,
Mhm.
what would it be? What would the hook be? Have you ever thought about that before?
I haven't really thought about it, to be
Yeah,
honest. No,
yeah,
no.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah,
It's hard. It's hard because everything has been done with the character that,
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
times you get retreads, I think one of the things that happened, I think just before your tenure was the King Superman story, the Superman Rex storyline that
Right.
they had
Yeah,
done,
yeah.
which again was a redo of an old 60s action comics two-parter where Superman declares himself king of the world, right? Um, Interesting. All right. Yeah. I thought
Yeah.
maybe you had something in your pocket there.
No, no, no. I haven't really thought about the character for a long time.
Yeah.
Like working on it for so long, it's kind of like, you know, it's almost like going backwards to. I don't feel like I had anything left over that I didn't get to do while I was there.
Well,
So
that's good. That's
yeah,
always
yeah,
good. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
What do you think the appeal is of Superman?
Um, I think if you get the character right, it's something that people can believe in. And I think depending on what's going on in the world, I think people want that. People tap into that, and I think they sometimes people need that more than other times.
Mhm.
Um, so maybe this could be the time in history where people need something like that, something that they can believe in. You know, we'll
Yeah.
see if this movie is able to bring that out in the character and not get bogged down in you know uh,
Yeah.
science fiction-y stuff. You know,
I think there's gonna be a lot of the fun Silver Age elements brought back
yeah.
to it. I like that it is going to be very comic booky. We're not making predictions tonight because the last time you were on, we
Oh
made
yeah,
some predictions
that
and
prediction.
yeah, it didn't go well. I think for me personally, reason why characters like Superman, Spider-Man, Hulk, a lot of these characters, the reason I think they resonate, and we're gonna have to close this on this, is that inside of us is always someone special. We all have our Clark Kent, and inside we have our Superman. We all have our Peter Parker, and inside we have our Spider-Man. We all have our Bruce Banner, and inside occasionally we'll have our Hulk. I think it is sort of that part wish fulfillment, part escapism. But I think for me, I think that is one of the universal things about Superman is that this is somebody who is a greater being who is very comfortable living among us. And I think that that is an important lesson that I think we all can learn, that inside of us is a greater being. And if you acknowledge that, and maybe you have a little of that overconfidence, also understand that it's okay down here too. You don't always have to be above everybody. You can always just kind of we can all just kind of be Be right there, right? We could all be a Clark Kent because inside we all have our Superman. And folks, with that, we're gonna have to end it. Thank you so much for coming back, Tom, on the Pep Talk. This was
Thanks for having me.
fantastic. I always love having you on. Maybe we'll
Great.
talk about the movie after it comes out. We'll do one of those roundtable things. But folks, look, be Clark Kent, be Superman, be filled with hope. Don't forget to fight for truth, justice, and the American way. It is a never-ending battle, but we can all do it. Thank you for joining us on the Pep Talk. Have a wonderful evening.
Powerfully said. Thank you to both of you for an excellent show. I was entertained and informed, and I'm looking forward to the next time you guys have a conversation.
Thank you.